Okay, so we have the Gx7 mechanical purge gun today. We're going to do a tear down, highlight some of the areas we want to be paying attention to keep the gun working very well. And we'll start by removing the fluid section and center line components, and then after that we'll get into the trigger and the cylinder assembly. So first we want to remove the air cap, and we always want to put a little air to the gun and trigger before we remove the pattern control disc or the PCD, so we don't score the valving rod when we're unscrewing the retainer. So we can see we have the PCD retainer, the PCD and the air cap. Now we're going to take the module body, then we'll trigger the gun. This time the module came out with the front packing. If it gets stuck in there, a couple of trigger pulls and it'll help extract that module. Okay, so at this point we're going to put the safety back on and remove our air supply. I just want to loosen that rear packing nut. And now we're going to take the stop into the service position, which removes it from the back end of the gun. So we're going to attach our air supply, and we want to trigger the gun. That will relieve the pressure of the valving rod from the piston, so it'll unscrew quite nicely. And we can relieve the air. Okay, so we want to inspect the valving rod, make sure there's no scratches or burrs on the front end, that everything's clean. If we have some material buildup, we don't want to be scraping on this with a razor blade. We want to use some solvent, maybe a light Scotch-Brite pad, and just keep that shiny so we don't destroy our mix module when we put it back into the gun. Okay, so from there we've released the valving rod from the gun block, so we can remove our gun block. Gonna support it. The gun block screw is actually captured. Okay, so that leaves us with the fluid section. The block is marked R for resin, A for ISO. Also notice on the ISO cap, we have the notches around the screen screw, and this one is smooth, so the A side always has the notches so that we can keep them separate from one another. So we'll go ahead and remove the screen screw. So the screen screw has the check valve assembly. It's kind of all together. It's a one-way valve, keeping the fluid from going that way. We have our screen. We want to make sure the bore is clean. Before we return it to service, we want to check this screen screw seal, make sure it's not cracked. Of course, clean into the bore of the gun block head. So we'll go ahead and remove the ISO side. Sometimes that check valve is a little more stubborn on ISO. Again, we want to make sure everything's clean. Doesn't have a material buildup. Same with the screen, the bore, checking the seal. We can remove our gun block gaskets and our rear seal. So we can use a pin or a drift to get the rear seal out, because we'll be replacing that. And that's pretty much the fluid section of the Gx7A gun. Okay, so now we're going to get into the air cylinder section, remove the cylinder from the handle, inspect the O-rings, and just make sure everything's working okay in there. So the first thing we want to do is we want to remove the rear cylinder screw and clamp. Notice there's a flat and then a chamfered edge here. The chamfered edge goes to the cylinder, so just be mindful when we go to put that back on. So now we can unscrew the cylinder, rear cap, inspect the O-ring, the spring. The GX7 gun has a spring close, so the air opens and then spring closes. So if we lose our compressed air supply, the gun will still close. So now we can remove the main piston. We have 3 O-rings on here. The main piston O-ring, inspect them for damage. If there are any nicks or anything, we can certainly replace those O-rings. Okay, so now we have to remove the 2 screws, and then the rest of the cylinder will come off of the handle. So we have 1 screw here. Okay, so we have the 1 O-ring here, and we have an O-ring here and an O-ring here. So there's the 3 O-rings between the handle interface and the cylinder. This is the clean off air. We're going to make sure the needle's clean and that the seal is intact. Take a look at the cylinder bore and make sure everything's clean, that all the dirt can be rinsed out of there, and we'll be ready to go. We'll adjust the valving rod position when we get the gun back together. So now we'll dig into the trigger spool. We have a 1/4 inch shoulder bolt and an elastic stop screw that we have to remove from the trigger handle. I like to put these back together so we don't lose them. Go over here with the handle. Okay, so what I want to do is remove the 2 plugs into the back of the handle. And we have the smaller plug. This will allow us to get a good look at the passageway and make sure there's no obstruction. We have these screws that we can also drill the handle if we have a gun that won't trigger. So we can remove all these access machining port screws and then drill the handle out. At this point then we can remove the trigger and the valve liner. So we have the retainer. Just take a couple of screwdrivers and very gently get the valve spool moving. We usually can grab with a rag from there. So what we have here is we have the spring. We have the spool with 2 O-rings. And then we have the valve liner, which has 4 O-rings. So we want to make sure that that bore is good and clean. And then we can just poke out the spring retainer. When we go to put this back in, we want to make sure this recessed bore is going to be able to hold the spool, and don't put it in this way. Okay, so that's pretty much the air section of the gun. We can go ahead and get things cleaned up, replace the O-rings that need to be replaced. We always recommend genuine Graco parts because we use O-rings that are really designed for the high temperatures and the chemicals that we're spraying today.